This podcast is for entertainment and storytelling purposes only and is not a substitute for professional advice. Some topics may be sensitive. Please listen with care and seek support if needed.
Hi, I'm Crystal Park. Welcome to Season 2 of the Because She's Adopted podcast. Welcome, Tanis.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so excited that you are here. So I only put TikTok on my phone just this past year, just as an attempt to maybe try and share some of my stuff on there and see if I could get more of an audience, because Instagram just wasn't hitting it for me for some reason. And I found you.
I thought you had this major TikTok presence. I was like, oh my gosh, she's done a lot of stuff. For some reason, I don't know. Yeah.
If you go back, you can see one of my first posts, and it says, "To all my 36 followers."
I think I saw that one, and I was like, that's amazing.
Yeah, it's so funny. I find TikTok is such an interesting space for adoptees.
It is.
And so, I mean, you're on there, but you just said you only have four posts.
Yeah, I do a little bit more on Instagram, I think, for my practice, and but I think it's a really incredible space to collaborate and to learn other stories and to hear other perspectives for adoptees. I think it allows adoptees to build a community where normally, we always feel like we don't quite fit. We don't quite fit here. We don't quite fit there. And so, those are our people.
Yeah.
So
I felt that too. Yeah. I feel like there's a lot of camaraderie in there. I have seen it go sideways, which is a little bit terrifying for me, but overall, I feel like it's been a really supportive community for me.
Yeah. I think it really challenges you to kind of take a deeper look at some of the perspectives, because we all have our own stories, but at the same time, seeing or hearing about other people's stories, or maybe a different perspective that you may not have heard of or may not agree with, or kind of just see a little bit differently. I think it's good to challenge your own perspectives and to see things from maybe a different lens.
I would totally agree with you. I think for me, when I did go on there initially, there was some things that I saw coming up and I was like, whoa, that is intense. But the more that I have looked into sort of the history of adoption, or even the practices of adoption, it's hard to unsee now. You really cannot look at adoption practices the same way again after you've learned what people have been through.
Yeah. I think it's interesting to see some of those stories, and then you really get an understanding of why there are people who have views like that, because they have an opportunity to share their story, and you get to learn a little bit about it. So it's kind of like you get a bit of a backstory in terms of why people have a certain stance on it, and you're like, that's completely valid.
100%. Yeah. It's great to be able to learn and not and to learn without judgment. I will admit, at first I did have that sense of judgment. I'm like, whoa, why are you so angry?
Yeah.
And I get it now. I really do get it now. So, so Tanis, do you want to just go to the beginning and just share a little bit about where your beginnings began?
I love to. So I was born in South Korea, and I really kind of got more concrete information about my adoption I think it was during COVID. And I was staying at my parents' for I think a week or something like that, and I was like, oh, it says Tanis' adoption in this bin. And I was like, oh, I've never really I knew that they were like, they joked, they're like, we lost your adoption bin. And I was like, oh, but then it was there. So I'm like, okay. And so I unpacked a little bit of it, and it was a really, really intense experience. And at that point I sort of just started doing, going back to school. And so kind of really taking, some time to reflect on a lot of these things. So, but the information that I received was really interesting. So my birth mother was 21. I think it said that she had 2 siblings, and there was no contact with the birth father. And there was just some, born a healthy baby. And it was, kind of interesting when you actually get to read that information, because initially my parents really just told me about, your birth mother loved you so much that she wanted to, kind of the classic story of like, she loved you, she wanted you to have this better life, and she felt like she couldn't raise you. And again, it was a lot from sort of I think international adoption a lot of times, because it's a really patriarchal society over there in Korea. And so that was another reason that was presented to me kind of as part of my story, was that, my birth mother would not have, would have trouble getting a job. And then it was like, it's a really sad thing. It was like the babies that have no surname. So, and something about like, it's like you're considered like baby without a face kind of idea.
Oh.
If you're born to an unmarried mother.
Baby without a face.
Something along those lines. I'm not exactly sure, but that was what my mom said.
Wow. So it's like the male gives you a face. Mm-hmm. It's because of the
having
dad.
A surname. Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
So, so that was sort of, it would have made my birth mother's life really, really challenging. Mm-hmm. And so it was common, and hearing now, like how many adoptees there are, so I was put up for adoption. I went to a foster home, with a foster mother. We have like photos of that. I stayed there for 5 months, and then I was, my adoptive mom, she came over to Korea, because usually they just put the babies on the plane and then there's like an escort there that takes you. But my mom came to pick me up, and so she spent some time there, and we went on our way back. We flew into Seattle, and that was that.
So you were in a foster home in Korea, like a Korean foster home.
Yeah. So which it wasn't. I wasn't at an orphanage, or I guess I think I was actually spent time, because my mom, when she went to pick me up, she got to go and see sort of where I was staying and stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Mm-hmm. Wow.
So that kind of, and then the rest is kind of history. It's, grew up around BC, and then again, just, kind of that experience of being in a small town, and it's predominantly white, and you're like one of like 2 other kids that are, different. And
Mm-hmm. I relate to that. I went to a Dutch Reform private school.
Okay.
And all of their last names started with a V, and they were all blonde hair, blue-eyed farm kids pretty much.
Yeah.
And, of course I'm white passing, but I definitely felt very different from them. Yeah.
It's like that sense of like, you do belong, but you don't, like, you'll never quite get there sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. When you're talking about the intense feelings that you were having as you were looking into your records in that bin, I relate to that. It's like, here's this information that is going to tell me something about me.
Yeah. Yeah, it was pretty wild. I think one of the biggest ones that really kind of like hit me was, and I think it was like a document from like from the government of BC or something, and it was like this kind of pre-typed letter, and it was like this baby, and then it had my name, and then it says and then it had like relinquished or abandoned, and it was abandoned was crossed out, so it was relinquished. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, because you hear the stories of, I mean, for a lot of folks, that's their story. They were abandoned or things like that. So I don't know, that might have changed the trajectory of kind of my identity development, I think, maybe. It very well could have, knowing, I was abandoned versus relinquished, right? Like, that kind of has a lot of power to it.
I think so too. So tell me what your adoptive family dynamic was like.
Yeah, that's interesting because, so obviously we always knew, and my parents, when they adopted my brothers, they're 5 years older than me. They didn't know that they were twins. There was two, so until like very shortly after they were notified. So
Your adopted parents didn't know that the two boys
that they were twins. Yeah,
adopting were twins.
Yeah, so they like got notified, like, I don't know, a little bit before, but then they were like, oh my gosh, we got to go get another of everything.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So they but they had discussed between themselves that they were always going to be open, and they would always know that they're adopted, right? And so when I came along, you can't really hide that either, right? So they so I always knew I was adopted. I always knew my brothers were adopted, and so growing up was good. I think I recognize a lot of times that maybe me always wanting to be like them and do what they did was maybe kind of a longing to belong or a longing to be the same. In a lot of ways, I kind of reflected on that, like, kind of while I was in school, like, did I really like it, like things like hockey and sports and all that kind of stuff, because that's what I really got into. I do feel like I did love it, but at the same time, I think that there was probably an element of wanting to be just like them. But the more I sort of started in my kind of adult years doing that identity exploration, I realized that, like, just this idea of, like, I don't have anyone that looks like me. Mm-hmm. Everybody else in my family does. Everybody else, like even my brothers who are adopted, but they're twins, so they have somebody else. And so I feel like that kind of was something that took me back a little bit to be like, yeah, I mean, I would love to know what if I look like somebody that I'm related to. But so I think that there was maybe a sense of jealousy a little bit, or envy, I don't know, like that it was like, I'm never gonna get that potentially. And also I think recognizing that they were adopted within BC.
Yeah.
And so I always joke that I was like, you guys could put out a post on Facebook and like you would probably be connected with a biological parent like right away. Like, I mean, twin boys born on April 1st in like Victoria or something like that. I mean, come on. Whereas for me, it's a completely different dynamic and search altogether.
So explain to us why that is.
So their adoption was a closed adoption. And so mine, there's not a lot of information, right? Like it's just, you get the papers that you have. And even for me, I did explore kind of on my own, just contacting like the adoption agency. Like I found like a piece of mail and I was like, I think maybe this is it. So I Googled it and Google to the rescue. But I did end up kind of contacting them and I was like, what's the deal? And it's very hard because there's like that huge language barrier. Yes. And then I'm like, I don't even know if I'm in the right, spot or what was going on. So yeah, that was really a challenge compared to, there's no language barrier if they, presumably with them and for them, like all their stuff probably would have been within the government stuff. Like there's, so many post-adoption services that are geared towards like the domestic adoptions and things like that, where it's like, oh yeah, the records probably would be with the BC government or something
Yeah.
like that, right? Like
Yeah.
it would be, you know, that sort of thing. So it does make it kind of more challenging.
Yeah. I know I sent away, I think, paid $20 or something. And
Yeah.
then they sent me all my live birth record and all of that stuff. So
Yeah,
that was
yeah.
really interesting. And yeah, so to access anything for you feels near impossible.
Yeah, I mean, I was able to connect with someone at the agency, and she did say that yes, we can their kind of process, and so I did go through that process where they were like, yes, we send 3 letters by registered mail to your biological mother, and then after the 3, like it's basically like the ball's kind of in her court, and they actually, in my case, they were like, we sent 4, and then they were like, the last one was received by, and I think they said it was basically a sibling or a half sibling, because it was like the biological mom's child or something like that. Yeah. So
they did find her.
yes, and
They do know, but they can't give you any information.
Yeah, so it's kind of I don't know what the exact letter says, if it's like, you know, here's this part of your life that you may be buried, I don't know. And so, yeah, I had done a lot of reading, and I really did a lot of kind of, you know, I was really wanting to consider what her experience was like. You know, was it a trauma for her, and she, you know, kind of buried that and did not want to like uncover that, and is that something that she holds great shame over? And now all of a sudden here I am just being like, who are you?
Yeah.
And then here she is, and it like completely, you know, turns her life upside down, right? And so I was, you know, again, like I knew that was a potential. Another thing with adoptees trying to do the reunion thing is that like second rejection or abandonment, where if they don't want to, you know, reconnect or anything, then it's, you know, again, that whole idea of like being rejected or abandoned again, can leave some pretty big wounds.
You didn't want me then, you don't want me now. So how did you process through all of that?
I think I kind of was a little bit excited, but at the same time I was like, you know, if nothing comes of this, and what they said was that they're like, you know what, maybe try again in a few years. And so it's probably been a few years, but again, I'm like, you know, maybe not. I, you know, wanted, you know, maybe I'll do like a DNA or something like that.
Yeah.
I haven't gotten around to that, but
yeah.
So that process was, I think I did that in, 2021, I think.
Okay.
And it was sort of around the time that I was like doing like my family therapy course and stuff. And so it felt like timing seemed about right.
Yeah. So your adopted brothers had a little bit of another story.
They did.
Without going into and sharing their story for them, maybe just give us a little bit of an understanding of what they went through and then how that impacted you as sort of an outsider.
Yeah. So their stories just, it's pretty incredible. Like I said, like they're, you know, it would likely be a very easy process for them to kind of look. And so one of my brothers did a DNA kind of ancestry thing. And so he kind of in the back of his mind. And the challenge, I think, with them, or I guess the concern that my mom had, I think, was like if one brother wanted to or was interested in looking and the other one wasn't, how you can't not, like, if one does and they find a bio parent, then it's kind of like the other one kind of has to tag along. And so, but anyways, they, so one brother did, and there was a direct match. And so, and it turned out that, their biological mom lived like 10 minutes down the road and had just moved to West Kelowna. So they had like a really beautiful reunion and story. And again, it was kind of really taken, taken slowly. And I think for them, I can't really speak for them, but I mean, it seemed from my perspective like it was a really exciting time for them, and a way for them to connect, I guess, with their biological family, and share pictures and see more similarities than they have. And so I think it wasn't until one of my classmates actually kind of was just like, well, how are you doing with all of this? And I was like, oh yeah, I guess I haven't really thought about that, right? And so I think it made me kind of reflect that, like, this isn't easy, because look at how simple it was for them, just to be able to like email back and forth, right? Share photos, and like I think that was kind of challenging, because I know that's most likely not going to be something that I would be able to do easily. But you never know. Yeah. So I just feel like, in a lot of ways, again, it's kind of that, a little bit of envy, or kind of like, I wish that would be an easy process for me as well. But
as you're speaking, part of my story is that my adoptive parents relinquished a son, and when my adoptive mom was 17, and then my adoptive mom found him, and same, like, he lived like 45 minutes down the road from us here. Crazy. But the surprising thing for me was how much trauma that brought up for me.
Really?
Yeah. Like and I had those feelings of jealousy, like, wow, he was found by his birth parents, who are both still together. They're good people, they're trustworthy people. They have his best interest at heart. Like, there was so many things about that whole circumstance that I felt like it illuminated where my story maybe wasn't as great. And
I could definitely see that.
And for me, it just made me feel like he is theirs and I am not theirs.
Right.
That's what it felt like to me. It was like, he belongs to them. He looks like them.
He fits in that puzzle.
He fits with them. And now I feel like I just don't fit even more.
I was thinking about that. Like, I mean, if you already kind of felt like that outsider, it's like, you're not even part of this puzzle. Like,
So that was a challenging, probably one of the most challenging parts of my sort of adoption experience.
Definitely.
Yeah. So how did you come to a place of acceptance for your circumstances, or does it still bother you?
I think just recognizing the reality of it. I think recognizing for me that, even if there would be challenges, because it's not like it wouldn't be a seamless, smooth process. I mean, there's, would be a lot of challenges, like even just like language barrier. And I can't just like drive down the road to go and visit and do those sorts of things. Like it would be a lot, but I mean, that's not insurmountable. Like, it's not like you can't do it. I mean, but I think, again, it's just like, okay, well, it's okay for now. Like, I'm in a place right now where, I'm okay with where my story is. And I think it's part of being an adoptee. It's just you go to where you need to be in that moment, and then, you can move on or pick up where you left off when the time is right.
Were there moments in your childhood or adolescence when you became more aware of the cultural or racial differences between you and your adoptive family?
Yeah, absolutely. There's this story that, I think was always told to me to be really lighthearted and funny. And I do still see it that way. But it, is very interesting that even just such a young child. So I can't remember exactly how old I was. I was maybe 3 or something like that. And, it was the summertime and mosquitoes love me. And so I guess was outside, had a bunch of mosquito bites, and I would like scratch them, and then they, kind of scabbed over, and they, I would kind of scratch them, but I was also out in the sun a lot because it was the summer and my skin got a little bit darker. And then, when you like kind of scratch off the scab and then it's like kind of white underneath. Yeah. I just, apparently one day out of the blue, I was like, hey mom, like, when's my skin going to turn white? Because I thought maybe that was when I was like, maybe I'm changing now. So she was just like, oh, well, actually. And so she kind of gave me that, well, God made everybody different, and the world would be really boring if, we all look the same. And so she, was like, oh, your skin's always so beautiful. I wish I had your skin. And, when I think back to that, I mean, it was kind of like, that's, language maybe, but again, it was harmless at that point. Like, I think more or less, I mean, I think that as an adult, I can reflect on that language a little bit, but at the same time, I think, there's no book on how to, talk to your kid about when they think that they're going to turn white.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, my family too, they would all, because I get so tanned in the summer, and they would all like gush over my skin color in the summertime. Even as an adult, they still talk about it.
Yeah.
And so looking back at that now, how your mom handled that without any fault of her, like, yeah. I don't put blame on her or anything. Yeah. She really was doing the best she could in that moment. What do you think you would say to that little version of yourself in that moment?
Oh my gosh. I mean, I probably would have not handled it as well as she did, to be honest with you. I wouldn't know what. Yeah. That, again, like, there's no book or manual for this, really. I mean, I would just, again, kind of say, that, yeah, everybody is different, and, you're maybe introduce the here's some photos of Korea and Koreans, and, yeah. Remember, like some of the people that I've met maybe, and, they're just like you. And so, and also making sure that I knew that my skin wasn't going to turn white.
Yes.
but yeah.
Making that very clear. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You and I had a conversation, I think the first time we met, about something had happened with violence towards Koreans. Mm. And can you share about that experience and how that experience impacted you? Yeah.
So that was during COVID, and there was a lot of the violence against Asians and stuff, and we were hearing a lot from the States, and it was really scary. And I know there was a couple posts on social media, and one of them was like, if you're feeling really like confused right now as an adoptee because you're scared, but at the same time you don't have a community to talk to about this. Yeah. You can't just go home and talk to your family, and your family's not going to be like, you should be careful, like, don't go out late, or, no one to kind of share that, like, be careful, because no one thinks about it, right? When everybody else in your family is white and they have no idea what we might experience. And so that really hit me pretty hard in terms of like, oh my God, like, should I actually be watching? And so I think after that, it was like, I think kind of coincidentally, I had like another experience where I was like at the grocery store, and everyone's still in masks at this point, and it may have not been anything, but I was in line, and then I think I don't know, choked on my own saliva or something, and like had a cough. And so, but I just remember like this look that someone gave me, and it was just like, and I was just like, oh my, like, I recognized there that again, I think it reiterated, like, I knew this message of the world sees me differently than I think I see myself even. And so I think that really kind of stuck with me, where I was like, oh my gosh, this is a real thing that that I don't have a community. And so when I saw that post, it was kind of, it really just, it made me feel, it was really validating, I think, for me to be like, yeah, I am confused, actually. Like, when I think about it, who am I supposed to talk to about this stuff? Right? And then I actually brought that to my mom. Like, this is like maybe a year later, and I shared that with her, and she's like, oh, yeah, you're right. Like, she's like, I never even thought about that. And I was like, that's kind of white privilege, but
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like, that idea of like, wouldn't it be nice to not have, like, I was, I wasn't scared or anything, because again, like, there wasn't a lot here. And again, we're in Kelowna. It's, but at the same time, it still is. There's still that underlying, like, fear a little bit.
Well, and I think to know that you are part of a racial community, is that the right way to say it? That is experiencing specific targeted attacks. That impacts you, right? Even whether you are within that community, whether you have connections to that community or not. I felt the same way when, they found the 215 in Kamloops. I was grieving, and I thought, why am I grieving so deeply over this? Because you are part of them. They are part of you. So it's a very strange place to be.
Absolutely.
You said something that kind of twigged me a little, that the world sees you differently than you see yourself. What does that mean?
Yeah, I think I never actually looked at myself. Like, I think I did, and I know, but there are so many times where, I look at a family photo and I'm just like, I don't think anything of it. And I was like, oh my gosh, when someone sees this, they're just like, what? Who is, like, what's up with this family, right? And I always used to go back to, like, the family photos that we would have, and I had some really big tomboy stages where my hair was really short, and so there's a series of, like, family photos where when you look at that family photo, it's just like, what is this little Asian boy doing in this family photo? Like, and, like, he's dressed in, like, a shirt that has flowers on. Like, it's so odd. And I'm like, Mom, you can't put this up, like, in the home. Like, you cannot. Can we just get rid of this one? But it's a really hilarious photo. But I mean, I think I recognize that, like, oh, when I look back at all of the photos, it's like, I look like, what am I doing? And so it really, I think one of the other things too was that when there was any type of family event, or, maybe it's a, celebration of life ceremony or something like that, or a wedding ceremony, and it's, I'm sitting with my family, and it's just like, who's that, right? Especially, like, I mean, when I look back, like, as, kids, I mean, sometimes it's you recognize that maybe, and then kind of like when they're a little bit older and you're kind of, young adult, you're like not quite sure. And so, and there are times where, I felt uncomfortable, and I recognized that was what it was. It was that people may not see that I belong in this family.
Yeah.
And I mean, there was one instance where I think I was like helping out at, a family event or something, and I kept being like, man, like, these people who don't know me might just think that I'm like hired help or something. And it was like, yeah. And I think that was like, oh, that discomfort that I feel every time there's some sort of event like that, where it's like, I am the only one that looks different, especially like because my extended family is really big on my mom's side, especially. And so, it becomes challenging because, there's other people that are like, who's that, right?
How have you reconciled your identity?
I think that I one of the biggest things was embracing my identity as a transracial adoptee. And that was pretty pivotal for me. I actually was, it was my therapist who actually stated this to me. And, you know, I was struggling, and I was saying, you know, like, I'm exploring these things in school, and it just kind of hits me. And then I was like, yeah, I'm not white enough to be white, but I'm not Korean enough to be Korean. So like, where would I fit? And then she's like, well, and I'm like, I don't know, like, who my community is. And she's like, well, what if you are your community? What if transracial adoptees are your community? What if, you know, Korean adoptees are your community? Those are your people. And I was like, and immediately I just had this sense of like, oh, I could like feel like my nervous system just being like, oh,
wow.
Oh, those are my people. And so I think that really spurred on sort of me connecting on social media and things like that, because it's a really amazing way to feel validated and have that. And so I think that's part of now a big part of my identity. It's less about fitting in with one or the other. It's you know, hearing other, you know, adoptee stories and what their experiences are.
It reminds me of just that belonging actually can be a choice. Like we get to choose where we belong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's not just this feeling, right? Because I think sometimes if we depend on it just being this feeling, 9 times out of 10, we probably won't just like feel like we belong.
Yeah.
But if we find the places that we're like, okay, I think I can belong here.
Yeah.
I don't know, like it is. So I do feel like I've found that sense of belonging in all sorts of places within friendships, you know, within different communities and not all necessarily within the adoptee community, but I do definitely feel a sense of belonging there for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. I think it definitely opens up that identity exploration in more ways than like, you don't really recognize at the time, like the adoptee identity. That's one piece.
Yeah.
It's a pretty big piece, I would say, arguably, but at the same time, it is one piece, and you know, each individual is so much more than that as well. Like you bring a lot more to the table, and I think that's also an important thing to recognize too. You know, that and everyone gets the choice to like how much of their identity it is, and what role it plays, how big of a part it is. So which I think that is also a very beautiful thing.
So we get to choose how much of that identity defines us.
Yeah, I think, and it kind of goes back to you know, the idea of like wherever you are in your journey is okay, right? I think maybe applying a lot to, you know, coming out of that adoptee fog, and you know, how ready are you? And you know, some people are ready to see it, some people aren't, and you really you know, kind of those stages that you go through, and so again, it's like how much of that are you going to look at, and how deeply are you going to look at it? And I think at different times in your life, you probably connect a little bit differently.
Yeah, I feel like I'm at the point now, despite what I'm doing here, I feel like I really want to embrace a more broader identity.
Yeah.
But I'm still struggling with what identity actually even is, because for me, I feel like so much of our identity is what the outside world says we are.
Yeah.
And I don't want my identity to be based on what everyone else says I am.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And so at the end of the day, it's like, okay, yes, I'm someone's mom, I'm someone's daughter, I'm Indigenous, you know, whatever, like, but it always feels like it's these outside sources telling me what I am. And at the end of the day, what my identity is like, I'm just me.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
like I I'm just me. And I guess you get to meet me and you get to decide how you see me.
Yeah.
And most of the time we don't have control over that anyway, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I don't know. Identity for me is still a really abstract concept that I don't feel like I've been able to grasp and ground yet.
Yeah. I think it makes sense that it's, an abstract kind of concept because of the fact that identity is always changing. It's always shifting. It's not a state where you get to and that's your end identity. It's always evolving. It's always changing, and which is a pretty incredible thing that you get to shift, and people are well within their rights to be able to be a little bit different than they were a couple years ago, right?
Yeah.
And I think that actually is also one of the challenges of maybe coming out of the fog is that, I recognize a lot of these things that I was doing that was not okay, that I'm not okay with anymore. And I, had talked to, my therapist about it, and they were like, you can always like say things like, you know what, that's funny. I might have laughed at that a couple years ago, but I don't think it's appropriate anymore.
Are you meaning like when your white friends make like racial jokes about, I still experience that today, and I still get frozen feeling like I don't know how to address this, and I don't give it any light anymore. Whereas like when I was younger, I always felt like, oh, well, if I make fun of myself first, then nobody will make fun of me, and so I would participate in that, and then it makes it okay for people to be completely like behaving in racist ways,
Absolutely.
or like using very racist language, right?
Yeah.
So that's sort of what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
it's
so
like,
have you had to do that?
I have, and it's challenging because like I was the one who would bring up those jokes and I would make them, and now I'm like, oh my gosh, that is not okay. That is like, that's a pretty big microaggression or something like that I'm like, oof, like, but I think over time it's kind of, after kind of using that type of language, like, I'm not seeing that that's okay anymore, or just kind of saying, I see how that would be a, kind of challenging to hear, right? And I think that, the people around me really understand that. And it's something that, it does shift maybe it may shift how they view me, kind of, oh, well, she's a little bit more serious about this stuff now. But, and that's a big lesson too that, is really drilled home in, while I was in school to become a counselor, that you, in your position as a counselor, like you have to stand up for the voices that aren't going to be heard, and you're in a position where people will listen to you. And so if you are the one that's kind of like perpetuating these, these stereotypes or these, things that are, you think are lighthearted, but, really offensive to some people, you can't be doing that anymore, and that's not appropriate. And so I think part of that was, school and just that gradual shift throughout school, I think probably was something that other people recognized for me that, she's, hopefully it was a good thing. Hopefully it was look at her grow. And, but I think for some people it might've been a bit of a challenge or shock maybe.
Yeah. I feel like some of my circle were like, oh, come on, quit being so sensitive. Like that kind of thing. Like I had a family member call me Pocahontas. Right. And it was like, and initially I'm like, I wanted to just laugh along and laugh it off because, whatever. I don't want to have to go there and educate you on what racism is.
Right.
But I also recognize like, okay, this feeling is familiar and I have felt this my whole life. And now I understand what it is.
Yes.
And I understand that like, I am not going to partner with it. I'm actually just like, gonna come up against it. Yeah.
That whole recognition of like, oh, this is what I've been feeling. When you recognize it differently, And then when you experience it again, it completely can change.
Yeah.
Because you're like, this is familiar, and I've felt this my whole life. But I didn't know that it was like, you know, this really difficult thing, or if it was this, you know, wound that I have that, you know, it's just really being reopened right now, or whatever it is. I think is just you have those moments.
Yeah. Did you ever feel like when you were, you know, starting those jokes or making those jokes that it drew attention to the fact that you were different, and then that offered you a little bit of comfort too?
I think so. I think it was like, let's state the obvious here. Like, and, you know, like things like, you know, oh, that's my white Asian friend, or like, you know, she's just a Twinkie, and all of these types of things, right? Like, and they're like, I'm like, that's not okay. Like, I understand that, you know, again, like 5-10 years ago, like that was what I would say, and now I'm just like, oh my gosh, like I can't believe that. And I understand that also changing your stance on it can be a big challenge too, because for the people that know you, they're like, oh, well, where did this come from, right? Like, don't be, that whole idea of don't be so sensitive. But I think it does take a lot of courage to stand up to those types of things. But just that recognition piece of like, oh, that feels familiar. And yeah, it does become that place of comfort of, you know, let's kind of state the obvious here.
Yeah. So what can you tell me what inspired you to get into the field of counseling? We don't have a lot of time left, but I do really want to hear your perspective on what inspired you to go into that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was just an interesting path that I took. Speaking of identity, like I think another piece of my identity is chronic illness, and I suffered when I was 16. I was diagnosed with a rare neurological disorder, and that really had disrupted my life quite a bit. And so I think that I'd always wanted maybe to work in the direction of people with disability or injury, or, you know, going through that whole chronic illness type thing, because it was something that I was so intimately familiar with. And I had it kind of for what at 16, 17 felt like my world just completely stopped, and it was turned upside down, and it was just complete chaos. But I think I'd always kind of felt like working in that area would be helpful for me in healing. And so I kind of got into that sort of pathway. And then I realized too that, you know, the mental health aspect, there's not a lot of support. And so that's where I was like, I think that's kind of the area of mental health that I want to work on. And which is why I work with people with illness, injury, you know, who are going to physical rehab, and people who have just been diagnosed with chronic illness because of just that lived experience. But at the same time, throughout school, learning more about adoption, learning more just about identity in general, because there's a whole world of disability identity, and that kind of really mirrored a lot of what I was seeing in terms of my own identity development, of like, oh, this is also a part of my identity, like, you know, how do I see myself? And so I think that probably really it kind of came together. Yeah.
I'm like dying to know more about the neurological disorder that you were diagnosed with.
Yeah. It's called Klein-Levin syndrome.
Okay.
And it is a neurological sleep disorder. And so I would go through states of hypersomnolence and just a completely altered cognitive state. And so I would go into these episodes that would last 7 to 10 days, and I would just
sleep?
Yeah.
For the entire time.
And I think it's like called like Sleeping Beauty syndrome kind of idea, and it's very rare, but and they're not quite sure if it's autoimmune, if it's what, because I mean that might make sense maybe why. Again, part of that identity piece is like, is it familial? Is it hereditary? Like, you know, did someone that I like, did a biological relative also struggle with that? You know, it would have been really, you know, interesting to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. And so do you still suffer with it?
No, I think it's kind of something that like it affects people, but by the time they're kind of like in their 30s, it just sort of resolves in a lot of ways. And so yeah, I mean, I struggled with it for during my late teens and early 20s, and then again sort of like mid 20s. And so again, it kind of set my life back a little bit.
Yeah, like how did it impact you? Maybe I'll ask, what was the biggest way that it impacted your life?
Yeah, well, it was a lot in high school when, you know, I had these hopes and dreams for, you know, playing hockey on a university scholarship and stuff. And that just like never, I never got to do that. I had to kind of turn down some things, some opportunities and stuff because I was just too sick to go. And so I kind of just ended up basically kind of biding my time in a lot of ways, hoping, you know, trying different treatments, which again, nothing really, they didn't know. So they were kind of like throwing stuff at the wall, seeing what sticks. And so it interrupted then, and then it kind of got a little bit better, and I was able to go to school and get my degree. And then I was in grad school before, and then that kind of came to a halt because I got sick again for like a couple of years. And so, yeah, I kind of had to restart things from scratch, and wasn't quite sure of what my direction was going to be.
Wow. That must have been really discouraging.
Yeah, it was. I think for all my life, I wanted to become a doctor. Like that was my thing. And, or I wanted to work in medicine. And I realized really fast that was probably not going to be an option. Just because I think at the time we, like with the condition, it was like, well, being out of your sleep pattern, like that's not, you can't work shift work, like that would be challenging. And so a lot of these different like kind of parameters on things that had to, where you're just like faced with these things that you want in your life and you have as goals, and then it's like, that's maybe now you have to change.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
How has your understanding of adoption evolved over time, and where are you at right now?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that has evolved is whose narrative is it? For me, the idea is that like adoptees are always given a story, or typically they're given this story about you know, their biological family and what happened, and they loved you so much, and I mean that's kind of, you know, they wanted you to have this better life, and so you're put up for adoption, and that's kind of the narrative that you're given growing up, and then you internalize that, and a lot of times like it's like, oh, you got to be grateful, you got to, you know, like you got to basically prove your worth kind of thing, and just so many like these internalized messages that that I recognized like way later in life, but and again, like not necessarily intentional or anything like that. It's just that's the way the narrative kind of unfolds. And the biggest thing that I've learned doing my own reflections has been that when adoptees like need to have their own narrative, they need to be able to write their own story, and they should. They have every right to. And it's nobody like adoptive families. I know, you know, there's a lot of different reactions that adoptive families can have, like they're offended or they're like, you know, threatened by it or something like that. But at the end of the day, you know, here's an adoptee who's like, I actually want to write my own story. I want to, you know, rewrite what my story is and rewrite the ending of it or whatever it is. And so here's this opportunity, and I really feel like, you know, it's an opportunity for adoptees to be empowered and to really take things into their control, because at the end of the day it is. And so, you know, being able to actually take their story and internalize their own story. And I think that's kind of the biggest change that I've seen with adoption and sort of the adoption stories and things like that. So I'm really, really sort of an advocate for people, you know, being able to do things for themselves, not to say that, you don't need to consider your adoptive family, because it does impact the family system. But at the same time, like, for adoptive families, like, I think it's, important that they understand that, that adoptees are allowed to take this story and narrative.
Sometimes we feel like we have to keep this loyalty towards our adoptive families. And what I've learned is that really what we're doing is we're betraying our own story. And we're kind of betraying ourselves and the voice that wants to actually be heard. And that's important right now to be heard. And so, of course, I'm always like, let's do this in a way that can be in the most loving way possible. But you can do things in the most loving way possible, and the way it's received can be, not that way too, right? Yeah. So, but I like what you're saying about adoptees should be able to write their own story. I really, really appreciate that, because as you were saying, we're given this narrative. It really is. The things, all of us adoptees, it seems like someone went to the social workers and gave them a list of lines that they're supposed to give us. I
feel like that is a thing, though. Like, I feel like it's like, here's how you can, like, make your adoptive child, like, feel more like they're,
But I think personally, that all of those lines is for the comfort of the adoptive parent and for the security of the adoptive parent and for the safety of the adoptive parent than it is more so for the adoptee. And some people might not like that I'm saying that, but that's my perception of it.
Well, especially when you consider that it's, that story's going to like a child, typically, that, that's the story that they grew up knowing. Like, I've known no other story. And, so you kind of have to accept it, right?
Well, and children are going to trust their parents. They're going to trust them that what they're saying is truth and it's gospel. And I could even hear myself, like, now I can think back listening to myself as a small child, just reiterating the exact words that my mom would tell me, and I would say them to other people. And most recently I found this podcast and I won't say what it is, but they are two women that are working within the adoption agency. And one of the women, who is an adoptee, said, one of the biggest challenges that I tell adoptive parents is that 80% of the challenge is controlling the narrative for your adoptee. Like, that's what we're talking about. And I call it adoption indoctrination. We are indoctrinated into this way of thinking about our adoption.
Absolutely.
And then no wonder we feel like we have no legs to stand on when we become adults and start to look at things for our own selves.
You don't realize that you are allowed to have your own story. You are allowed to have your own narrative around everything, because we grew up knowing only one. And that there's like no room for anything else. Right? A lot of times.
What do you wish adoptive parents of transracial adoptees understood about the experience of being adopted into a different race or culture?
That's a tough one. I think just allowing space for them, I think it's important. I think that, it's really challenging to think, because I know I've read stories about people who would go to, like the culture camps and things like that, and some had really great experiences, others had really terrible experiences, and I think I through my reading and research and things like that, it's, I'm hearing a lot of perspectives of like, oh, well, some people who had like their culture celebrated on a special day or something like that, or, they felt othered, right?
Yeah.
They felt like they were being kind of, oh, this is you and we're celebrating you, right? And so, whereas other people, like for me, I think I wanted to belong so much that I kind of rejected any of that stuff.
Yeah.
And I also was like, again, like super into sports. And so the things that my mom had for me, like, were like dolls and stuff. And I was like, I don't want this stuff. Like, it's pink. I don't like that.
Yeah.
And so I think it was easier for me to reject those types of things. But, it just was, I think, allowing the child to explore, but also watching out for things like microaggressions, and then also like almost like model how to manage those things for your kid so that they grow up understanding what is acceptable and what isn't. I think that it wasn't until I was like in grade 12 that I learned a bunch of different racial slurs. I had no idea. So I think that for me was a big shock, but I think there was a lot more microaggressions as well that happened that I probably like went right over my head for the longest time. And so you don't develop any skills to deal with that. And so now you're an adult and you're like, oh, that's kind of offensive, but like, how do you deal with that if you've never really been taught or it's never been modeled to you? And so I do think that is probably important, is to watch out for that and to kind of, show their child that, what is okay and what's tolerable, what's not tolerable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And which would mean they'd need to be educating themselves as well.
Yeah. Doing a lot of their own kind of internal bias checks, right?
Yeah. Any final thoughts?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think it's just been such an incredible experience to come on here and talk and share my story. I've never really done anything like this. I've never had an opportunity really. And so it's been really special for me to come on here and share my story with you. And yeah.
Well, I'm just so grateful for you, and I'm so grateful for your willingness to share your story and the courage that it takes to do so. It really does take a lot of courage. So I recognize that and commend you for that, and express my deep, deep gratitude. Yeah. And I'm grateful to know you and to live in the same city.
Which is amazing.
It is. Yeah. It is, because it feels like there are no adoptees anywhere except my husband. He is always promoting me everywhere he goes, and he meets adoptees everywhere he goes. Everywhere. It's wild. So I don't know. Maybe I just need to talk more about it than I already am. Where can viewers and listeners connect with you?
So I have my private practice is Vantage Point Wellness in Kelowna, and I have an Instagram page, website, and they can connect with me. My office phone number is there, and email, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's great. We'll include all of that in the show notes so that people can connect with you, and you can connect with more adoptees.
Absolutely.
And I know you'd appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I just want to say thank you to Tanis, and thank you to everyone for listening today. We appreciate you being here with us, and you can find us on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts, and we'll see you next time.